Welcome, everybody, to School Psych Podcast. I'm Rachel. I'm a school psychologist in Maryland. Hope everybody's hanging in there in this weird kind of, 2020 school year, and that everybody's doing good. And we're really excited tonight for amazing guests. And I know that we've all been looking forward to tonight to learn and to talk. And I think it's going to be a good conversation that we're all going to, learn from. So I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca, though. Rebecca's going to tell us how we participate. So, Rebecca.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. This is our last official 1920 school year episode, although you will likely see us a couple of times before next school year. But you can participate if you're watching us or tuning in live by logging into your YouTube account, and you can comment right alongside the live video in the chat box. Be aware that your login information, your name, will appear in the chat box, and sometimes we like to, just share comments, positive comments or connections along the video stream so that it's not a perfectly private conversation. So just be aware of that. If you'd like to make a comment that you're not sure that you want in the live chat, you can also comment on Facebook, either on the School Psych, your school psychologist page or School Psych podcast page. You can comment under the posts, which are at the top of both pages, or in messages, and I can share your thoughts or experiences and ideas that way. And also, of course, on Twitter, I'll be looking out for the hashtag Psyched Podcast. We have our @PodcastPsyched Twitter handle, and then each of us have our own Twitter handles as well. So we hope to hear from you tonight. This is going to be an important conversation, and we'd love to connect. And now I will pass it off to Eric.
Okay, I am excited to have an old, I would say long time. She's younger than me, so I can't call her an old friend. A longtime dear friend who I have known for quite a while, and she's just an incredible person. And we wanted to shine a light on the amazing work that she's doing, and there's so many things going on in this world today. And I think Nelba's perspective and her heart have so much to offer us to hear. So I'm going to read just a little bit of her bio and about the Anna Grace Project as well. And then we will begin a heartfelt and wonderful conversation. So Nelba Marquez-Greene is a clinical fellow of the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, and has worked in private practice, community mental health, and academic settings in the US and Canada. Prior to founding the Anna Grace Project, Nelba served as the coordinator for Klingberg Family Therapy Center's outpatient child and adolescent psychiatric clinic, and was on the adjunct faculty as a faculty member adjunct at Central Connecticut State University. Love Wins is her family slogan that they adopted after Anna's senseless murder, and this movement is one of increasing relational connections. Nelba maintains an online community of over 100,000 followers, and the Anna Grace Project community where people from all over the world learn, share, and grow and witness love through grief. Behind this is the belief that not only does love win, but it also saves lives. The Anna Grace Project has adopted classrooms in New Britain that focus on social and emotional learning, and it has hosted mental health conferences and professional learning opportunities all over the country. Nelba also holds a bachelor's of music from the Hart School of Music, and her husband Jimmy is an incredible professional saxophonist. And Nelba also has a Master of Arts in Marriage and Family Therapy from St. Joseph's College, and she was a founding member of the CT-AMFT Diversity Committee. I also want to say Nelba has been selected as one of the 100 Women of Color and as a YWCA Women's Leadership Award recipient. She's featured in the 2019 release, The Book of Gutsy Women by Hillary Rodham and Chelsea Clinton, and in People Magazine's October 2019 issue as one of 10 women changing the world. She's testified and advocated at the state and federal levels on many different mental health initiatives and hosted TED Talks, and is a sought-after speaker nationally. Also, the Anna Grace Project, as I mentioned, Love Wins is the slogan, and this has been Nelba's work, and the project is dedicated to promoting love, community, and connection for every child and family through 3 lead initiatives: partner schools, professional development, and music and arts. And lastly, I'm going to borrow from an introduction that I heard Nelba give to Bruce Perry. So I found it so charming and funny. But as lovers of Harry Potter, I find this to be true, that my friend Nelba also has enough courage of a Gryffindor, the loyalty of a Hufflepuff, the wisdom of a Ravenclaw, and just enough Slytherin to keep this interesting. So welcome, Nelba. We are so glad that you're here.
I can't believe you remembered that.
Well, I'm a bit of a Harry Potter nerd, and it struck me so funny. I wrote it down when you said it, so I know.
Yeah.
So
thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think the work that you're doing is so important, and we want to shine a light on that. I think seeing you with Bruce Perry last year really brought about a lot of eye-opening work for me in terms of understanding ACEs a little better and understanding trauma. I don't know if that's a good place for us to start, the work that you're doing through the Anna Grace Project.
So I think I want to pull it back even further and just head into this slowly and start by first talking about my experience with school psychologists. So for some time, we were living in Canada, and the structure there is a bit different. But when we returned to Connecticut, one of the things that was apparent was that we needed to put on a 504 for a heart kind of issue that she had. And even though I had, my husband has a bunch of degrees, I have a bunch of degrees, the idea of putting a child in a new system, learning this like American school system, now that my kids are in elementary school, and being spoken to about a 504 plan was incredibly daunting. Even though, it was explained to me in my primary language, even though I didn't feel like people were being disrespectful, despite all of the advantages and privilege that I had, when I received that phone call from the school psychologist, it was absolutely daunting. And I still remember Mary Sherlock talking me off the ledge, because I'm like, what do you mean she needs a 504? She's perfectly fine. And Mary slowly and gently married her kind of breadth of knowledge about the system with this way of explaining why my child needed this in order to just have a safer and better school year. And it wasn't just for her, it was so that the school could be prepared in case her heart condition acted up, and during the school day. So I wanted to start there because the work that you do is so incredibly important in translating important information and opportunity to parents of all kinds. And again, even though I had all of this information in my head and all these degrees, and I lived in the same community, and it was in English, and I understand English, it was still really hard. So I want to give you guys a lot of credit for what you do in schools, and also for the information that you share on your websites and social media, because I think it helps both parents understand and also providers hear this side. And as for someone who's been on both sides, it's really hard.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And I think, it's interesting, right? Even though we have degrees, and you have the mental health background, and Jimmy has his doctoral degree now, it's just amazing. And yet, right in the midst of working with our own kids and the schools, these processes are daunting. So yeah, I appreciate that. And it's important for us to remember that this is about connections. This is about making sure we're doing the right thing.
And that's a good segue into that conversation, the conference with Bruce, and we're talking about trauma, and we're talking about ACEs. There's absolutely no way, no matter what expertise and information we have, we're going to convince a family to trust us enough to take our recommendations if we don't build that connection as a foundational principle. So I share that story with you, just how you know. And all she was saying to me was, we have to put a 504 plan in for a heart condition. When we're talking to parents about things that are that feel even more daunting to them, and sometimes trauma and ACEs and all of that stuff, right? Our parents have so many concerns. Are you going to call the police on me? Are you going to call the Department of Children and Families? Are you going to tell someone that this thing is happening in my home or in my community that my child has experienced? The overriding feeling, and there really is no rationale for this, but that I remember I felt when the school psychologist called me, was shame. What had I done that I needed this thing that we couldn't handle it at home? And very often when I talk to parents, that's the same thing I hear. I hear a sense of shame, and the fear and the sometimes kind of antagonistic relationships that are started stem from that shame, stem from that there's very little trust, or, I don't want anybody to know. And that's where we need to start. It has to start with trusting relationships.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I always think of this partnership as, with so much respect for parents as experts on their children. I would never pretend to know more about someone else's child than they do. And I think, when we can lead with that, let's kind of put our heads together and collaborate on what can be the most supportive steps for your child. I think that's so powerful and so beautiful and so fulfilling on our end as well.
I think that's a really, good reminder to us as school psychologists, because sometimes we have to run from meeting to meeting, and it's really good to slow ourselves down sometimes and realize that because we might have 10 meetings in a day, kind of back to back, that this is something that parents remember, and this is something that kind of sets the groundwork for that relationship. And so we have to sometimes slow it down and make sure that, though it might be the 10th meeting for us and we might not, we might be kind of running around, that that's comforting to hear that you as a parent kept that with you, that was helpful to you. And so I hope that all of us moving forward have those experiences and are able to do that for parents, instead of, sometimes we do hear horror stories about the school psychologist said this, and 20 years from now, a parent is still upset and holds that and remembers exactly what was said. And so that's a good reminder.
I remember sitting in on a PPT one time, and I still remember this story, and it makes me giggle a little bit because we were able to resolve it, but it pains my heart mostly. And I'm sitting in this PPT, and it's a family. English is not their first language, and they're very unfamiliar with this system. And the parents of an elementary school child have been informed, older elementary school child, maybe younger middle, that their child has expressed some suicidal ideation. And we're in this PPT, and the mom looks at her daughter and says, "So you got 100 on your depression test," or something like that. She was just so unfamiliar with the process that for her, what the school psychologist and what we were saying on the other side of the table is, you actually got 100 on your depression. That's how she understood it. So sometimes it's about finding the common language that parents understand. It's about, unfortunately, meeting with them and having a team that's proactive. Too often our parents are meeting us right when there's a problem, when their problem has been identified, and we get to deliver this news. And it's just so hard. So again, having those relationships and letting people know ahead of time, this is your support team. It includes a school psychologist, it includes a principal, it includes a social worker, it includes a teacher, and we're all here to help you. Is I think had that mom had that, and we were able to sit down with her and say, no, here's another way to look at it. But it can be quite difficult.
Yeah, in a recent interview that you had, a live stream on the Anna Grace Project, where you were talking with Dr. Bruce Perry, you said something that has been lodged in my heart and brain for the whole time since I've heard it. But you said one thing that was always very important to you to teach your children was that the two most important and I think bravest questions or things that they could say were, one, I need help, and two, how can I help? And that is just so powerful. I haven't forgotten it since, and I so agree. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with Dr. Perry, or how you got into that work?
Sure. So after everything happened, I actually worked with in a collaborative team, interdisciplinary team at Klingberg, and that included a psychologist, a psychiatrist, some social workers, MFTs, and we were all there. And it was actually the psychiatrist who thought to mail me a copy of The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog at Home, and it came with a little note, and it said, I know you're not going to read one grief book, but remember that it's all about relationships, and I'm thinking of you. And that was the sticky note on the book. And I devoured that book on a plane. We were going somewhere in January, just maybe 30 days after the shooting. And I devoured the book on a plane. And I said, I'm going to find this guy. And Bruce Perry is very difficult to find, incredibly difficult to find. But I found him. And I remember calling and getting like someone, and I'm like, hey, my daughter was just killed, and I've got this beautiful son at home who survived, and we have to get this right. Can you just have Bruce give me a call back? I'm going to leave my number. And she goes, and Bruce is a very special one of those human beings that you don't encounter very often in this life. And he has been a friend, a faithful, loving friend since that day in January that he actually called back up until now. And he has something, if you're a school psychologist and you're out there listening and you're interested in healing communities, he has an event every 2 years in Banff, in Canada. And it's a symposium of healers from around the world. And he talks about the neurosequential model. He's very invested in the neurosequential model. It's all his research is based on the neurosequential model. However, you don't have to be a practitioner of neurosequential model to participate in this experience. And I would say it was supposed to happen this year. It was actually supposed to happen, 2 weeks ago. But if you can get to Banff, and it was rescheduled for 2021 due to COVID, if you can get to Banff, you will be in an environment of like-minded professionals interested in healing both themselves and this world, and where relationships are the underpinning to healing. So I would highly recommend that experience. I also recommend you tack on a day before or after the conference just to be in the nature, the hot springs, the mountains of Banff, because another thing we don't do really well is self-care. Like, we are in our buildings, we are doing our testing, we are trying to get everything done, and we're not really well balanced. So finding those professional development outlets that allow us to get both the learning and some healing for ourselves, and just that being in relationship with all these people from around the world who are just like you is just, you feel like, for me, I'm a Hufflepuff. I feel like, I'm in the Hufflepuff house, it's just great. So yeah, I would recommend Banff and looking up the Child Trauma Academy for anyone listening.
Thank you. I think as school psychologists, I'm trying to remember when I did a talk on behavior supports at one of our conferences, maybe Chicago in 2018. And it was on building capacity for behavior supports. And I asked, polled the room, how many people had heard of the ACE study. And the room, I would think as school psychologists, every hand in the room should have been up, and they weren't. And so I think, just reminding us to continue connecting at that level with our families, with our students, and understanding that adverse childhood experiences have such a huge impact on our development, on who we are, how we relate.
And I don't know if you remember from the conference, we spent a bit of time talking about ACEs, but mostly we spent a bit of time, a much longer period of time, talking about how ACEs doesn't encapsulate relationships and the important role of relationships as a buffer to trauma. So we don't want families feeling discouraged if they actually tick off, a ton of boxes on the ACE scale. It's not necessarily, yes, it can be a predictor of likelihood of certain things, like we know, hypertension and, all kinds of things, but it doesn't take into consideration relationships. So I can't say that enough, that that's the beauty, I think, of this particular conference. We're not just bogged down in the, okay, if you get because again, like I said at the conference, I was very open. I'm a 9, but I'm a 9 with, I always say I'm a 9 with wings, because of the relationships in my life as a young person and as an adult that have helped to buffer some of that back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. And that piece of that, I think we're starting to talk more about in school psychology is resilience, and how do we come out of that experience with some sort of normalcy. It's not normal, but it's different, but getting back on track and at whatever way possible. And that's it. That, we talk about in schools, one positive relationship with a teacher can make a difference in turn a child's life around. And that's so crucial.
In regards to relationships, do you have any thoughts on what we're going through now as far as COVID and returning to school and social distancing and wearing face masks potentially in schools? Do you see that as having a negative impact on forming relationships and mitigating some of the impact of what people are going through with the COVID crisis?
I'm going to pull that back a little bit too. My biggest concern right now is teacher safety, school personnel safety. We're having conversations about sending school staff back. Many schools who have teaching and staff populations above the age of 55 and 60, so that are higher risk. And I see parallels here between COVID and what we did after Newtown. What we did after Newtown is we decided, you know what, the kids deserve normal, so send those teachers back, ready or not. I would implore decision makers to really follow health guidelines, right? The health and well-being of our school staff has to precede the health and well-being of our kids. We can't say, we got to send the kids back because we need them to be resilient. We need them to know grit. Well, guess what? If you're sending kids back to a building with scared school staff who are feeling unsafe, it's not going to work. So my biggest concern with COVID and the return in the fall, and I get that there are real issues. There are real issues with parents who need schools because they have to work. I understand that it is complex. And also, I deeply am concerned for the health and well-being of school staff, their own emotional state. I don't think we can be resilient or teach grit or teach any of those things if we're feeling unsafe about our return. I also see two different Connecticuts. I see private schools having one conversation where the school where my child attends is like, please prepare for an online fall. And yet I see other districts and they're like, yeah, well, we're going to go back in September. So I think it's really, really important that we talk about inequity. I think it's really important that we, understand that our school staff has to be taken care of before we can expect them to take care of the kids.
Yeah, that whole, we've used the analogy a little bit in some of our discussions about reentry, about putting on our own oxygen mask, before we can address the child's needs in that respect. I do think about that. And I think Rebecca and I talked about this recently. I'm not sure we're measuring teachers' anxiety level and teachers' reluctance to return, and how I think we're going to need to.
Because we built the narrative of a hero teacher, the hero teacher who will die for their child if there's a shooting and protect the whole classroom. The hero teacher who doesn't need much and will spend her whole paycheck or his whole paycheck on their classroom. You know what? I'm so tired of that narrative.
So true. And I think the inequity point is so important because like you mentioned, private schools and schools with bigger budgets perhaps are able to set aside the time and the money to bring in teachers first and take care of their needs. And I agree with you that is so important. But when it feels like a luxury, something's wrong, because I think that it is not a luxury. And if the adults are not okay, how are we going to have the kids be okay coming back to school? And the adults are really vulnerable in this situation in particular. So there's so much to think about when it comes to that. Even if class sizes are small, what about like music teachers that are seeing multiple small groups, or, and right now I think also upon reentry, we really have to think about the value and importance of our extracurriculars, music, art, PE. I almost think that those are going to be the most important classes that kids can re-engage in. But we've got to figure out how to make those teachers feel okay, and logistically, how are they going to not have 4 sets of 10 different kids all day, increasing their exposure risks?
And when you're saying that, the first thing that pops in my head is in urban districts. What's the first thing we cut? Music, art, extracurriculars. So we already have a Connecticut that is well, you know what? I can't say unlike anything I've ever seen, because I have not lived in another state, right? But I have worked in Hartford and I've worked in Greenwich, and I had kids in Newtown, and now so I know that already we had a problem before. That was very clear. And add COVID, and we need to have some serious discussion.
Yeah, I think our practitioners, I think our other states probably mirror some of this, but I do think we have some huge gaps in Connecticut, especially. And I'm thinking too about our Black and Brown educators, not just our children, but the trauma that people are seeing and feeling right now due to the racism that we're all seeing, and the inequities that that are becoming sort of more revealed through COVID and through actions that we're seeing in our society. I don't even know how, if a teacher has already felt that they're having trouble in their district because of those things, how comfortable are they going to be going back and being faced with the same microaggressions, the same issues, and then our children who are seeing and experiencing this stuff? There are so many layers that I think we have to are going to have to get to as we re-enter or consider re-entering.
It has been encouraging to see districts make statements, especially around the brutal murder of George Floyd. And in this season, to affirm Black Lives Matter. And also, if there is no substantive plan, it's going to be different when we return. My son is 15, so maybe he's a little older than some of the little, but he gets all the news on his, there's no escaping now, the news of now and the urgency of now. So we have already an inequitable system. Maybe teachers nervous to return, with anxiety to return due to COVID, and additionally, a climate that has changed. And many of our school staff can fully embrace the urgency of now and understand. But we need to be honest and tell the truth that some of our school staff isn't there yet. And if you're not there yet and you're returning to school and you're working with Black and brown kids, what does that mean now? So we have a lot of things to think about for this fall and for now.
Yeah, a lot of work to do.
For sure.
Yeah, and as a school psychologist, we have an understanding of, we have a lot of, I think, we have knowledge of self-care and strategies and things like that. But I, for sure, personally, as a mom and as a school employee, I'm worried about what the school year looks like. And so I'm kind of like everyone else, kind of looking at all the news, and it's overwhelming, but you also want to be informed. And so, yeah, I think about families that have a lot more going on than I do, and a lot less of a skill set than what I have through my education and my experiences. And it's a lot. It's upsetting to think about, and it's a challenge.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I mean,
in part, that's how and why we started the work on the Honor Grace Project, right? We knew that living in Newtown, how do I say this? We knew that living in Newtown, the response and the resources that became available to us after the shooting were going to be more than any kid in Hartford or New Britain or Waterbury or New Haven was ever going to get, despite having had a similar loss, right? So when I started, the Honor Grace Project, it was in part knowing that reality, having been, Jimmy's from Bloomfield, I'm from Hartford / New Britain. So we were those kids who had, needs over there who were never met. And listen, I'm very grateful for the help and support we got, but I always talk about that there's tons of kids out there and tons of families who go through, loss of a parent, loss of a sibling, loss of a child from gun violence, and don't receive the same type of support. So I think we're starting to increase the levels of those conversations in our communities. I think we're also increasing our levels of community partnerships, school community partnerships with mental health organizations, with after school clubs. I think we are starting to say there is no way we're going to survive this alone. So where are the community groups and services that we can partner with for our kids, for our school culture? I think we're starting to normalize self-care of teachers, right? So I've seen some schools do some really beautiful things, like have a stress management room. We know the premium of space in schools, right? So when I see a school has a dedicated space where a teacher can go and there's attention paid to lighting and seating, and there's there's like a little thing with the aromatherapy, that it's telling me that we're becoming more aware, and that's really important.
Yes, I think it's such an important point, that we can't do this alone as like internal school people, that relying on our community partners, and especially LMFTs and licensed clinical social workers who are brought up in a training that thinks about systems, right? And we certainly think about systems change as school psychologists as well, but a lot of times we're thinking about individual students, and I think, as you also said, the urgency of the situation is we need all caring hands on deck right now. And I'm also wondering about what you think about sort of what we often say, what gets measured matters, right? And we focus often on measurement of how are kids doing, what are their stress levels, how are they feeling, how anxious, how sad, how are they doing in terms of academic achievement and all that. But in schools, a lot of schools that I know of don't measure how the adults are doing very regularly. And I wonder what you think about that in the return to school. It's one thing that I'm sort of pushing for in my work is, let's find out, let's hear from teachers, let's measure. How are they feeling? Are they stressed? Are they anxious? What's the burnout like? Do they feel connected? Do they feel capable, effective as teachers?
One of the considerations with that, because I saw that play out in Newtown, is when you're being measured by the same organization or force or group of people who do your evaluation and who are going to offer you tenure or not, or who are going to decide if you stay in this classroom or this building or that, it can be very scary for teachers. It can be very, very scary for school staff when you say the place where you work is wanting your honest feedback on how you're really doing. So there has to be a certain trust level or a certain good faith effort that what they share is somehow protected. One of the things I saw a school district try to implement is in the teacher evaluation, put in a dimension of self-care. Obviously, they can't mandate, but they could strongly encourage and then have different offerings during the year. So I think you have to be really careful with that, because what I've seen sometimes, if that trust level isn't there, that no one will participate because there's so much fear. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Definitely. I think there needs to be anonymity and, demographics, so we can say, like this grade feels less, confident about the curriculum than this grade, but definitely that protective anonymity. And then again, I think, couldn't an outside agency or research group provide that kind of assessment measure for the school so that it isn't, the school psychologist or administration? Yeah.
And one more point I wanted to go back to with community organization and partnership is that I want to make sure that people understand. I know evidence-based is the flavor of the month, everything, but there are a lot of groups in your community who are doing amazing work who are never going to get an evidence-based label because it takes $1 million or more to receive an evidence-based label. So go outside the box. Let's not be the group that waits for the latest flavor of the month model that everybody wants, and it's evidence-based. So, and it's like it's evidence-based, it has to be good. Well, it's one size fits all. Nothing is one size fits all. And there's probably a group of folks. One of the most amazing things I ever saw was the first time I went to see Nadine Burke in 2013 or 2014 in California, San Francisco, where she had her clinic. And one of the things they had done was trained local grandmas on ACEs. And then those local grandmas became the ACEs expert, and they went around telling you want the community to know something, tell the local grandma, because they were telling everybody about ACEs. And I got to meet the grandmother advisory board that they had put together, and it blew my mind. Another thing they had was these pediatric visits that had local community folks in the visit. So if first of all, she was the first one to do the thing where she gave the ACEs at the regular screening, right? The regular pediatric well visit. So if you ticked off a certain number, maybe it was 6 or more or 7 or more, there was a person that came in and said, hey, we noticed you had a 7 or more on here. And if you kind of allow us, we'd like to go visit you at your house. I can play Xbox with your kid. I can, go for a trip to do ice cream. I can do whatever. And that helped so much, not just in the transfer of information to the family on what ACEs were, what we needed to do, but also build the trust with the clinic, with the advisory board, with the doctors, because then it was part of the community. So I wanted to do about evidence-based. Then I wanted to talk about measurement, giftedness, and discipline. One of the things that really you see is in your role and how we measure giftedness is, let's talk about race, right? It's not just that we're disciplining Black and brown kids more. We're missing them in the evaluation of giftedness. And that's a huge issue that I wish more school psychologists would take on. We're not just punitively punishing. We are completely disallowing for the beauty of the uniqueness and giftedness that these little brains have. And that makes me really sad. It's also happening, like Eric, I know you're in Meriden, and Rebecca, you're in New Canaan, two totally different communities. The same behavior in Connecticut and Meriden and New Canaan have the chance to be treated so much differently. So can someone talk to me about how we're going to get rid of punitive punishment for kids' behavior that just needs help?
Amen. Restorative, right? We need to move to restorative practices as we approach discipline. And we need to move. We do talk about some of this stuff in school psych circles, that we are, yes, as Dr. McClure was saying, underrepresenting. We're excluding kids. Some of these practices, testing for giftedness, those kinds of things have become exclusionary or remained exclusionary, perhaps. And they're not excluding based on gifts, they're excluding based on, it becomes segregational. And
we're excluding based on zip code.
Right. Yeah. And the same, you're absolutely right. The discipline piece, we talk about this stuff a lot. We talk about the achievement gap. We've been talking about that since I moved here 25 years ago. But we need to see policy changes that lead to practice changes.
We need to see policy changes. We also need to examine our own biases, right? We also need to be really having a conversation with our helper community about our own implicit biases. Because if I think that, I remember talking on my Facebook page about the high levels of maternal mortality rates among Black women. And a teacher was basically like, I don't believe this. We're all one race, the human race. And I tried to get into a conversation with her. And basically, she's one of these teachers that if you wear a belt and you do the right things, good things will happen to you. So I'm unwilling to look at the statistics that are telling me that we have implicit bias, and that's problematic. That is incredibly problematic. So we need to change policy. We also need to change our hearts and be open to and humble enough to say, I may have implicit bias.
Yeah, I'm hoping.
And my implicit bias may be keeping a child from being gifted, maybe keeping a child from being an AP, maybe dissuading. So I have 3 friends with doctoral degrees from Hartford Public High School. Well, 2 friends with doctoral degrees and 1 on her way. And do you know that all 3 of them were discouraged from applying to college? And if you talk to Bruce Perry he'll tell you, he said, I was the biggest knucklehead in high school all throughout. I was like the craziest kid. And I too was discouraged from applying to college. We've got a lot of power as professionals, and we need to make sure to wield that with care and responsibility.
That's really well said. I'm just thinking, let that sink in for a minute, with care and responsibility.
Yeah. And speaking of being a knucklehead, I was also a knucklehead in high school, and I know you have a strong work connection to CCSU, which is my alma mater. So I just So can you tell us a little bit about that? The trainings that you hold through Central Connecticut State University, and that is sometimes with Bruce Perry as well, correct?
So yes, it is, and I'm very, very fortunate. So before everything happened, I was actually adjunct at CCSU, and then at Klingberg. So somehow, there was made a way for us to partner more formally with CCSU and the Honor Grace Project, and it was at the same time. that Central Connecticut State University was trying to pass an application for a Center for Social and Emotional Learning on campus. So we actually have a center. It's not a physical building, but it's a concept. It's a Center for Social and Emotional Learning. And it's run by the school, and it's in this School of Education and Professional Studies. And what that means is we get to do really fun and relationship-based work in reminding people that all kids matter and are important, and here's how we can show up for them, and how we can prepare better professionals. So the Honor Grace Project gets to partner with the center, and we host Monday weekly podcasts also, or Facebook Lives, and we have conferences, and we bring in outside guests. We had Bruce Perry the first year, and we were going to have Mark Brackett from Yale, the Center for Emotional Intelligence down there. We were going to have him. He's great. We were going to have him do his thing, and looking for other opportunities to have professionals. And we do other community-based things. We host community drives. We host an event in April yearly, which connects local elementary school kids, brings them on the campus, and connects them with our student athletes, and reminds them to finish the race. We actually finished the day on the track with the athletes, and the elementary school students run the track with our student athletes. And it's really neat because our student athletes are incredibly diverse, but I promise you that almost every one of them has been a big sibling, because these kids come, and it matters not. We could have the best professor in the world, and it doesn't matter. Kids see themselves in these athletes, and the athletes talk about, being good citizens in the classroom and in their sport, and how, scholarships, and it's just an amazing, and we weren't able to have it this year due to COVID, but it's one of the highlights. I also have an endowed scholarship at Central, the Anna Grace and Isaiah James Marquez-Greene endowed scholarship for a New Britain High School student who has exemplified love winning through adversity. And our first recipient, Jamina Walker, she's actually a double major in business and accounting, and she takes Chinese for fun. She's going to graduate in December. So, I'm just grateful and humbled by the different opportunities. We don't have to, no one has to do all the work, but everybody has to do some of the work. And that's what we've got. We've got an opportunity to do some of the work.
Can I just give a shout out to what you're doing? Just a amen. So people really hear, as an outside observer coming onto Central's campus last year and going to this workshop, and the embedded social and emotional learning, the embedded respect for culture, the culture of learning, the culture of caring throughout the campus was obvious. It was just amazing. And just to be able to walk around the campus and see plaques to famous Black scholars, the flags that you have on the lampposts, it was just really amazing to see that, and then to see and hear how professors are embedding equity and social emotional learning into education classes, literature classes, not only for the college students, but hearing how their teacher training program is working to get these back into the classroom for teachers. I was blown away. I really was. I just can't even say enough about it. It was impressive, to say the least. And hopefully
we're not, we don't get everything right, but we have a lot of willing hearts and a lot of willing brains, and people who just get it and understand and recognize the need to do more. So it's a great place to be. And Rachel, you've been really quiet. Am I talking too much?
No, not at all.
I probably am, though.
I think that, what you're doing is amazing. And I think that your strength and your modeling of your strength just gives people hope. And I think that's what we need, that because there's a lot of work to be done in the world, and so we need to keep doing that work. And so you're doing that. You're doing the good work, and you're modeling how to do it. And I think you're making a lot of. I'm just in awe of you. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And a word on that, a word on grit and resilience, because I get a lot of emails from people saying, "Could you teach my, mother-in-law who lost her, whatever? Could you teach my sister?" Is people can't be gritty and resilient without resources. So we need to make sure we're embedding those resources in community. I've been blessed. I have a lot of resources, and my resources are my community, my faith, my church, my the women in my life who make sure I get out of bed and do what I need to do. So we need to make sure that our communities have these resources as well. And that's why we keep going. So.
So I think we're looking for, if anybody has last minute questions or comments, we'd love to kind of hear from you guys. I know that this is the last podcast of kind of the school year, but we are in talks with, we had a lot of questions, I guess, that came out when we talked about cognitive evaluations in the past. So we're looking to get, maybe in light of COVID things, to get a panel going of some of our experts on that. So that'll be really great. But a lot of great positive comments. I know that everybody is just kind of hanging on everything that you said. And again, just thank you for everything.
Well, I'm not going to be as sexy as cognitive evaluation. However, I want to tell you that I have a kid who survived a school shooting, and he's going to be 16 in a week and a few days. And my son, I'm going to do a little brag for a minute. And many of the siblings are actually doing incredibly well. Incredibly well in many different dimensions, not just school, not just academics, but as well as it can be. And I'm not minimizing the grief. The grief is always there. However, one of the things that the school did right was they assigned a home school liaison for all of us with surviving children. And that home school liaison was in charge of managing any issues of information flow, of different, anything, right? And that was really positive. I want to remind anyone out there who's working with a family where you see no hope, that the more you offer a sense of connection, there is hope and there can be hope. I think people thought there would be very little hope for a lot of those kids, my son included, after everything happened. And he's an amazing student. He got a scholarship to boarding school. And he is a joyful, happy, funny Gryffindor. So there is hope for our children, even if they have high ACEs or traumatic experience. We just need to make sure that their parents and the adults around them are equipped with the tools to care for them and have enough care for themselves.
I know we're running short on time, but so much of what you said reminded me of some of the things that when we talked last summer, when you were speaking at APA, and you used that amazing analogy of getting big in the net. And just, to me, you were speaking about connecting with our communities, the sphere of influence and making those connections. I don't know if you can summarize any of that in just a minute or two, but it spoke to me so well.
And being brave, right? So I talked about Isaiah when he is, so my son's a goalie in hockey. And when sometimes there's something called a breakaway, where the other team, everyone's coming at you because there's a loose puck, and the only thing standing between all those people and the net and then making a goal is you. And if it were me, right, my instinct would be to stay close to the net and cover it with my arms. And I never see Isaiah do that. The more skilled he got, he would get further out in the net, away from the goal. And when I asked him why he did that, he said, "Mom, because you have to get big in front of your opponent," right? So one of the things I noticed your professional organization does, is get big, right? Your Arthur Evans, your head now, the way I've seen him take on gun violence and different issues. It's just been really wonderful to see some leadership in that area. It was Alicia Abersold who invited me to speak at the APA, and we need to get big. We are the only thing often between doing right for a family and not doing right for a family. So you get big in that net.
Thank you. That was Dr. Proctor, by the way. You have an array of school psych rock stars in the chat column commenting. So Dr. Proctor
I can see she says that's scary to watch as a goalie mom. So she must be a goalie mom too. Yes, it's scary to see as a goalie mom. Oh my goodness, it's the worst. But here he is. He wants to play hockey. I'm like, Isaiah, could you do something more culturally relevant, please? Like, there's baseball in our family. Your father played basketball. He's like, no, I want to play ice hockey. So I'll be the only Puerto Rican mom at ice hockey. Fine, kid. I'm growing.
I love it.
Yes, I'm sure you'll be big in the stands.
That's right.
I'm sure, Rebecca, that you can kind of, have some of those things. I know your kids play football, and Rebecca often it's just,
And I vary from watching like this to binoculars, watching their expression.
That's right. Hey guys, I just want to say thank you for having me on, and thank you for the work you do. I know it's a lot of work to hold a Facebook page and do that kind of, and you can kind of never make anyone happy. Don't forget, that's not your job. Your job is to get big in the net and give that good information out so that we can digest it in good doses, which you always do. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Nelba.
So much.
AnnaGraceProject.org is the website if people need more information.
Yes.
So,
and they can follow us on Facebook. We put a lot of information there.
Yes, and I put some of the links that you mentioned in the chat. I'll also put them on the Facebook pages and on Twitter. So thank you, everybody out there, for tuning in, and thank you so much, Nelba. This is going to be another conversation that I hear that's going to stay with me for a very long time. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nelba.
Bye-bye.